All right, let's get you some reaction to that report being released just earlier today. We're joined by Zimasa Mpemnyama, who is the project lead for the alcohol harms reduction campaign at the DG Murray Trust, pardon me. Zimasa, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. I mean, effectively what this report says is that we've got the regulations in place, right? But the regulatory framework doesn't speak to each other.
Thank you for having me on the show, Michelle. Yes, when I breezed through the report, it did show that, and say it inadvertently and loudly, that the regulations are there. There's space for us to make more regulations and the space for the regulations to be put into place. But these two things don't speak together. What is reality on the ground does not speak to the legislation that is there. And what was important that was also noted in the report was the fact that there is legislation that is sitting currently with the Department of Trade and Industry, that is the Liquor Amendment Bill, that has the capacity to make sure that we reduce the harms associated with alcohol consumption in South Africa. But it has been sitting with the department for 7 years. We have the Control of Marketing Bill that has been sitting since 2013 that has not been taken up by the department. So the legislation is there, international law is there. The DGMT as well has also been pushing research that is well known throughout all these departments, but these departments and what's happening in South Africa are not speaking together, even after not only just the Enyobeni tragedy, but multiple other tragedies associated with the young people drinking alcohol excessively in South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, what are we going to do if part of the recommendation is that we have more oversight and we have more accountability, and we just don't have the kinds of boots on the ground needed for that kind of oversight? You know, so a recommendation takes place, but how do we enforce it?
That's a very difficult one, Michelle, because these bodies, as the report says, and also as we have seen in our research as well, these bodies somehow do not have capacity, but also these bodies are not efficiently trained with the knowledge of the laws that are in place. For instance, the National Liquor Laws norms and standards. And you will find that even the ones that are supposed to enforce the law don't know much about the law. So the buck goes back to national institutions like the Department of Social Development, like the Department of Trade and Industry, like the Department of Health, like Parliament, for them to take seriously alcohol policy and alcohol legislation. So when you view things like the budget speech and they talk about excise taxes, some of the parliamentarians you'll see there are laughing when they talk about the increasing of excise taxes. But this is a well-known formulation strategy that can increase the price of alcohol, in order to make sure that we reduce the amount of people that are drinking and therefore reduce the harm of alcohol. But when you see that spectacle, you see that somehow these people don't understand the importance and the gravity of the laws and alcohol policies that are bestowed upon them. So again, the buck goes back to government. The buck goes back to those institutions that are higher up, that have the power to sign into law legislation that has the possibility to make change in South Africa when it comes to liquor policy and liquor law, and therefore trickle down to the institutions that are needed to enforce these laws. You know,
Zimasa, I wonder whether these laws and these policies will make the kind of difference that you're talking about. Because, you know, I'm just looking through some of the targeted recommendations. It's that issue of boots on the ground, you know, effective monitoring of liquor establishment. It's tailoring training programs for ward councillors and metro police, retabling and enacting critical legislative measures aimed at curbing alcohol abuse, and the list goes on. I wonder whether at a policy level this will translate into the kinds of changes we're talking about in a context where our young people don't have things to do in their communities. You know, there are no community halls. There are very few functioning libraries, if at all, in many communities. But you'll certainly find a liquor outlet on every single corner. So I just wonder, you know, is it policy that we need, or is it giving our young people other avenues. Build a park, you know, get young people together on a Friday night in a youth group. I don't know. I just wonder whether policy is the answer.
Michelle, policy is the answer. So the question that you're posing is twofold, right? That is there a need for legislation, and what else can be the alternative, right? So there is a need for legislation. There's research that DGMT has conducted that shows internationally, and projections that have been done by the University of Cape Town, that if you enforce certain policies called the first 5 best buys, you are able then to reduce the amount of deaths, the amount of gender-based violence, the amount of road accidents, if you enforce these forms, these legislative outputs. They're called the 5 best buys. And this is the strategy that DGMT has taken. But also the second part that you're putting into place is the recreational activities. So this curbing the harms associated with alcohol consumption are not a one approach thing. They're a holistic government approach. And these are the conversations we've been having with the Department of Social Development as well, in that even when you treat people for alcohol substance use disorders, there needs to be a holistic look at the issue of alcohol, that this is a socioeconomic problem, this is a political problem, this is a lobbying problem from the alcohol industry that has a lot of money and puts in a lot of money for advertisements, and therefore has a lot of power in the sector and a lot of say in the sector. This is a business issue where a lot of money changes hands, and there's a lot of jobs created here, and therefore governments are not keen to intervene in the sector because of the economic aspect of it. And so it's very deep and very entrenched in South African history and South African society. But then what we say is that let's take all of this together. Sit down as communities, sit down as government, sit down as law enforcement, and chart a way and actually take seriously alcohol policy. We have a problem in South Africa, Michelle. And if we don't take this issue of alcohol seriously, then it's very bleak for us. Because issues like Enyobeni will continue until we actually take steps and take alcohol policy seriously, like we took the tobacco issue seriously back in the 80s.
Yeah, certainly. And I've heard you say the word enforce several times in that answer, Zimasa. And it comes back down to boots on the ground, right? We need people on the ground who, as you say, know the policy, they know what the law says, and they know how to enforce it. And that's not going to be an overnight thing. I mean, it's been almost 2 years now since the Enyobeni tragedy. And you know how we are as South Africans. We move from one crisis and one disaster to the next very, very quickly. And we lose sight of the importance of issues around alcoholism, the use of alcohol, and our young people.
That's very true. I think I want to take us to, there's a case that Digimare Trust has put in the Western Cape against the Ghanaland local municipality. So that municipality wanted to extend its trading hours from 2 a.m. in the morning until 4 a.m. in the morning, and an establishment could put in an application to the municipality to extend it even further until 6 a.m. in the morning. And our intervention in that setting was that we took that municipality to the High Court so that the High Court can give us precedent and say, is it constitutionally right for municipalities to have the power to extend trading hours to these unthinkable hours? And we furnished the High Court with research that shows this. So this is what we're trying to do with municipalities. And that is the tricky part here, is that when it comes to liquor legislation, there are bylaws that are governed by municipalities themselves that can allow the flexibility of trading hours. There's no national legislation that says at this hour, liquor stores must be closed at this hour nationally. So each municipality and each province has its own thing going on. And therefore, hence it is so hard for boots to be on the ground at the same time, because there's a confusion around which area is this, which zoning part is that. So what we are calling for is for a national moratorium. We must have a national closing hour. We must have national government must take hold of this sector and be the one to govern it, so that we can then point fingers and say, Mr. Bekitsele, your people are not doing this. Mr. So-and-so, your people are not doing this on the ground, instead of these haphazard things that are happening, and then we have incidences like Enyobeni.
Yeah, and it's such an important thing that you're mentioning. I just wonder, again, whether we will get buy-in from the likes of those who will be losing money, essentially, as a result of this national closing hour, for example, that you're talking about. Zimasa, it's always a great pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much for coming on. Zimasa Mpemnyama is the project lead for alcohol harms reduction, that campaign at DG Murray Trust.